Welcome to Rocky Mountain Marketing. I'm your host, Katie Brinkley. Join us as we dive deep with the world's leading digital marketing experts every single Tuesday. It's all about giving you the strategies that are working right now, directly from those who are making an impact. With my 20 years of experience, I'm here to help you navigate the world of digital marketing. Whether you're looking to sharpen your skills or transform your business, you're in the right place. Let's get started on today's journey to success. Welcome back to this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. I've been running around in the same circle as today's guest for a few years now, but he and I haven't ever really had the chance to sit down and have a conversation. It wasn't until I posted on Facebook and he responded that he would love to come on my show. Folks, this is just putting it out there. You never know who's looking at your content regularly, who's reading it, and what type of opportunities could happen, because I wasn't even really looking for guests to come on my show, but I did a post saying, if you could be a guest on any podcast, what podcast would it be? And today's guest said, well, yours. And well, that was so flattering because like I said, I've been running around in the same circles as today's guest for a number of years now, see him at conferences all the time. And he really is, I'm going to say, an OG in the world of podcasting. He was inducted into the Podcasting Hall of Fame back in 2018, and he's written the book, Profit from Your Podcast. Today's guest is none other than Dave Jackson, and he's launched over 30 different podcasts with over 4 million downloads. So we're going to be talking all about the world of podcasting and how incredible it is for you and your business. Dave, thanks for responding to my Facebook post, and thanks for joining me on Rocky Mountain Marketing today.
Katie, thanks for having me. It was weird because I was like, do I invite myself on her show? I'm like, she's asking for guests.
You did, and it was great. For my post, I was just curious as to what big shows people listen to, because I listen to Joe Pulizzi's podcast every week, all about being a content entrepreneur, and I would love to be on his show one day. I've listened to your show, School of Podcasting, and I was like, wow, now we end up doing a podcast swap. So I was actually a guest on your show, and you never really know what shows are open for opportunities. If someone said, oh, I'd always love to go on School of Podcasting, and you saw that and you're like, oh, actually, after looking at this person, I'd love to have them on as a guest. You never know what kind of opportunities could happen. Yeah, I think it's it was a great conversation starter. I got some really cool responses, and it really allowed you and me to get to know each other better and have you join my listeners here on Rocky Mountain Marketing and share some of your brilliance of podcasting. Dave, you were inducted into the Podcasting Hall of Fame in 2018. That was 2 years before Rocky Mountain Marketing launched, and you're in the Hall of Fame. How long have you been loving the world of podcasting and really helping businesses and brands launch a podcast?
Yeah, 2005, I had a friend of mine, and I was doing a blog for musicians at the time, and he was a musician, but he was really into marketing. He said, hey, I just came back from this conference, and again, I'll date myself. I had missed the MySpace boat, and he said, I just saw the next big thing. And I go, what is it? And he's like, it's podcasting. And I Googled it, and there was 1.5 pages. Wait, how do you spell that again? Like P-O-D. I'm like, okay, yeah, I think we broke the internet. There's nothing on the internet about this. When I finally was able to literally hand code an RSS feed, and then I found this archaic software, and I uploaded a file, and I saw it come down. I was like, oh, this could be really cool. So I turned my blog into a podcast, and I had people say, you went from being words on a page to a person in my head. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then about 2 weeks after that, the thing that really solidified that I was like, oh, I am planting my flag in Planet Podcast was I got a voicemail from a guy in Nuremberg, Germany. And I'm in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. It's me and a bunch of cows. And wait a minute, some guy on the other side of the planet actually found my show and liked it and then replied to it. And I was like, oh, this could be really cool. My background is in training. I taught in the corporate world a lot of Microsoft Office and QuickBooks and time management and customer service and all that stuff. And so when you give a teacher a podcast, they want to help teach. If you give a salesman a podcast, they want to sell. There was a friend of mine that had cancer, and he started a podcast about kind of not giving up. And he had stage 4 cancer for almost 11 years. Unfortunately, he just passed away. But even as he was passing away, his last time I saw him, he was teaching people about hospice care and how you don't have to wait till you're like right on the final brink to go into hospice. And so it's always interesting seeing what people do when you put a podcast in their lap.
We talked about this when I was a guest on your show. Is podcasting is very near and dear to my heart because I come from radio. And you were saying that you were blogging before and then you started speaking. Did you feel like there was ever that, man, I've been writing this stuff, but I've always kind of been that man behind the curtain? I feel like I'm kind of stepping in front of the curtain. And this was before video was so accessible for all. I mean, anyone can have a YouTube channel now. Anyone can go viral on TikTok. But do you feel like from going from behind the curtain and really holding the microphone changed a lot for your confidence as a teacher, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, it was weird because when I was growing up, I actually was fired from my first job because I was too shy, and nobody believes that. I'm like, nope, you can talk to people. It happened. And then over the years, a friend of mine basically said, fake it till you make it. So pretend you're outgoing. When I started that, I was basically talking about how to, because it was for musicians, how to get more gigs and sell more CDs and things like that. But there was a guy named Bob Baker who is like the godfather of music marketing. And he had a huge newsletter. And I'm like, well, who am I? But what was cool is because I had a podcast, I was able to go to Bob Baker and go, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? And he's like, sure. I remember talking to him and I'm like, how did you become Bob Baker, godfather of music marketing? He's like, well, when I started my newsletter, I'd been playing in bands for a while. I had a marketing background. I had written for different newspapers. So I just kind of put them all together. He goes, I took out my magic wand and touched my head and said, you are now a marketing guru. I go, oh, okay. So it dawned on me that I was like, okay, I guess I'm a podcast expert. But at that time, even when I was teaching, I remember once I had to teach a Microsoft Access class, and I hate that software to this day. And I had to teach an advanced class, and I knew the software and I could teach it from the book, but it wasn't like Word or Excel or PowerPoint where I knew it like the back of my hand. And I went to my boss and I'm like, are you sure you want me to teach the advanced class? And he's like, look, you just have to know a little more than your students. And I was like, okay. So yeah, there was definitely some of that. And you mentioned when I got inducted into the Hall of Fame, that really messed with my head, so that when I get home from Philadelphia and I'm getting ready to hit record, I'm like, is this Hall of Fame worthy? It was like, for about 4 days, I'm like, what am I going to do? I have to live up to this title now. It just dawned on me. I'm like, look, I got in there being myself. I just need to keep being myself. And apparently that's what they like. But it really jangled my head for a bit.
Well, Dave, I love that you are sharing that with us, because I think that so many business owners, entrepreneurs, they have that imposter syndrome of, should I really have a podcast? Who wants to listen to blah or this? And it's really social media. I have a social media agency, but social media really is a lot of flashy lights.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes that people aren't seeing. And we're only showing the highlight reels. So I think a lot of people have that imposter syndrome, and it prevents them from starting a podcast. And here you are in the Podcast Hall of Fame, and you're sitting there saying like, gosh, is this good enough?
Yeah.
What tips do you have on overcoming that imposter syndrome for people who maybe that's what's holding them back from launching their podcast?
Yeah. Number one is most people think there's nothing special about me. So if you got with other people that work in social media, you guys would have almost your own language talking about different software packages. So it seems like, well, everybody knows this stuff. But if you talk to me, I'm going to be like, wait, what? What's it called? How's this? Do a slide reel? What? I have no idea what you're talking about. All of a sudden you're an expert, but you don't seem like an expert when you're surrounded by all these other people. So being a musician, I was the youngest of my family. I inherited the Beatles from my older brothers and sisters. I remember once I was talking to somebody, I forget what they said. And I said, oh man, total Pete Best. And they're like, who is Pete Best? And I go, you've never heard of Pete Best? And they're like, no, I have no idea. I go, come on, seriously? And they're like, no. And I go, he's the original drummer of the Beatles. He was before Ringo. And they're like, how do you know this stuff? And I'm like, everybody knows who Pete Best is. And she's like, no, you're a freak. Nobody knows who this guy is. So that's part of it. And then the other thing is, There's a great documentary on Netflix about Garth Brooks, and he got some sort of double platinum diamond whatever award from back then. Giuliani was the mayor, and he awarded him like the key of the city, and he was named the top country music blah blah blah. But he's in town in New York City, so the good old country boy's gone to the big city, and he's gonna play Central Park. And he's convinced himself to the point of like closing the curtains in his hotel that nobody's going to show up to hear this stupid country boy. So in the documentary, he's talking about it, and his wife is like, look, I got to go outside. I can't be in this dark room. And he's like, no, don't go. He's like, all right, just don't tell me anything. So he goes out, and she finds out that they had to move the barricades. So finally, like his tour manager or somebody goes, hey, Garth, there's about 800,000 people out there. Because first Garth goes, let me guess, there's nobody out there. And he's like, no, there's 800,000 people out there when they checked 20 minutes ago. And Garth Brooks goes, wait a minute. You're telling me there's 800,000 people out there to come see me? And he goes, no, Garth, I'm saying there were 800,000 people 20 minutes ago. And so, by the time it came on, it was almost 1 million people. But Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, the guitar player from Queen, Brian May, all these guys I've found in different interviews that say, like Tom Hanks was on the Today Show. He goes, I'm a total fraud. Martin Short's another one that every time he gets done doing a movie or a TV show, he's convinced that's the last time he will get hired. So from my research, about 70% of people have some form of imposter syndrome. I don't know why. I got done doing a webinar today for Libsyn, which is a company I work for. So I don't have a problem with video. I don't know what's going on that right now I'm stuck. Like right now we're doing this video, but doing a video on my YouTube channel right now, I don't know why I know I just have to push through it because we have a running joke at the School of Podcasting. Nobody's going to punch you in the face. Like they're just not there. So I don't know what's going on, but I'm like, all right, I just need to push through this. I got the topic in my head. I got some graphics. I just need to talk into a camera. But right now, for whatever reason, I'm like, okay, get out there. You just kind of grab yourself by the collar and like, come on, here you go. You can do this.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because, like you said, we're on video right now. And it took me, I want to say maybe 2 years of having my podcast before I actually used the video portion on YouTube because I was afraid of people seeing me and what they would say. I think that we are our own biggest critic. I love that you shared that about Garth Brooks and Tom Hanks and Martin Short. Man, I'm sure you watch Only Murders in the Building. Oh, such a great, anyone who has not watched Only Murders in the Building, it's on Hulu. Selena Gomez, Martin Short, and Steve Martin. Phenomenal. I can't imagine Martin Short would ever say that because he's brilliant.
Going back to his days on SNL and all the other things he's done. Yeah. It's crazy. It kind of reminds me, did you ever go to the gym and you're worried about what you're going to wear and I got all this weight to lose or whatever? And you go there and you're watching your phone on the treadmill. Like you're not looking at anybody else.
I know.
And so is everybody else. Nobody's looking at you at the gym. And so when you're all self-conscious about your podcast, I'm like, oh my gosh, I had a cereal bowl in my background on the video. Like nobody cares. They came here for the content.
So true. I think that with podcasting, it allows you an entirely new way to build the know, like, and trust factor. So once you kind of get over yourself and just say, okay, I'm just going to press record. Let's just give it a go. There's something magical about having someone, really, you and I are having a one-on-one conversation right now, Dave, but we can connect with people so much more powerfully through sound than really any other medium. You can hear me stutter over words. You can hear when you got really excited talking about Garth Brooks. I mean, I could hear your voice go up an octave and I could tell how passionate you were about music and sharing his story. And those are little cues in audio that just build connection, unlike any other medium. And now for a quick break. You've heard me mention some of my favorite tools on Rocky Mountain marketing in the past, and today I want to talk to you about Podmatch. Podmatch is the tool that you need if you're looking for more shows to guest on to elevate your brand authority, or if you're a podcast host yourself and you've been looking for the perfect guest, Podmatch is your solution. Podmatch matches guests and hosts through their system, and I've had a tremendous luck with them over the past 5 years. Check out Podmatch at joinpodmatch.com/Katie. All right, let's get back to the show. really, if someone is saying like, okay, maybe I will start a podcast, I won't be nervous about it, I just got to hit record and press play. What tips would you give them about having this podcast as their digital resume?
Yeah, I always say, going back to being a musician, when I put a band together, we were usually in the basement for months learning 40 songs. If you think about an author, they do like when I wrote my book, there were like probably 7 drafts of that where my publisher kept going, okay, here's the latest amount of edits. And I'm like, how can you keep finding things to edit that they have to be all gone? So the first thing I always say is don't release the first thing you record, because number one, congratulations, you overcame your fear and you pressed record. You're going to hate your voice, and that's science, because when we talk, you listen through your ears and your skull. It's called bone conduction. So when you hear yourself back through your speakers, there's no more skull. It's like somebody unplugged the subwoofer. Like, where'd all the bass go in my voice? You're like, no, it's not bad. It's just different. What you need are some friends who will tell you what you did right, but there's probably something like a rough draft that could use a little polishing. And I always say do that, because the more you do it, I had a member of the School of Podcasting. He does a show called Lessons from the Cockpit. And he's a guy that flew in like Afghanistan, like he's, people shooting at him and stuff like that. But he's the guy that you would come up and fill up your plane docking to his. So he's a pilot, he's an author, and he's a keynote speaker. And I'm like, okay, you have content and courage. Like, what is stopping you from starting a podcast? He was afraid of looking stupid. And I said, okay, I get that. I said, do you trust me? He's like, oh, absolutely. I go, good. Go record episode 1. I'll let you know what's good and what's bad. So he came back and I go, this is a phenomenal story. I said, but I can really tell you're reading this. I said, try to go back, add a little voice inflection. I said, occasionally throw in a pause, because you're reading it. You don't have to think about what you're saying. He came back. I go, perfect. I go, you could release this if you wanted to. I can kind of still tell you're reading it, but it's close enough. He's like, all right, hold on. Went back and did it again. And I said, this is amazing. He goes, yeah, I'm not reading it anymore. I go, well, maybe that's your workflow. He started it. And what's amazing is he did it to help his business. He makes these big, you basically send him a picture of your plane and he makes this thing for you to stick on your wall. It's amazing. And I said, how's business? He's like, that part is great. He goes, but the part he didn't realize, old stereotype of people that end up in war, they come home and they never talk about it. And he says, so I'm talking to other pilots who in many cases have never talked about their experience. And he goes, it's actually turning into kind of therapy in a way. He goes, but I also love the fact that once you get out of the whatever military you're in, you kind of miss that camaraderie. So all of a sudden you have these guys that are all talking their Air Force jargon, the K-4766, and you're like, what? So he's having a blast, just hanging out. I think his call name was Sluggo. So they've all trading that. So it's one of those things that it can really help. And that's really how you get over it. So that would be my advice, is just wait till you get it right. And if you think about the first time you tied your shoe, rode a bike, drove a car, you're nervous. I still remember, like, are you sure I'm not on the sidewalk while I'm driving a car? That whole 9 yards. So you'll get more comfortable the more you do it. So just keep doing it and realize that the third time you do it's going to be better than the first one. And eventually you do have to release it. I know some people are like, I've done 7, different versions of episode 1. I'm like, it's probably good enough.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to hear some really terrible, nervous Katie Brinkley, go back. I still have episodes 1, 2, and 3 up there. They're not very good, and I come from radio. I'm used to talking into a microphone, but the confidence issue was there. And I was trying to read it. I read it a couple times. And man, this was before AI and platforms like Descript were out there for editing. And it took me about, for my one 20-minute episode, I think it took me about 3 hours to edit, because I was so nervous about all the uhs, the ums. It's like you said, like driving. I grew up driving a stick, a manual, and I had a Saab 900 was my very first car. And man, it took me a really long time to learn how to drive that stick shift. I'll never forget how nervous I was, because I was 15 and my dad drove my car over to my friend's house to pick me up. And then he was like, all right, you can drive home. My friends all came out to see my new car and watch me drive away. I kept stalling. I kept stalling and I kept stalling. And I'll never forget what a mess I was and how embarrassed I was. for having to, my dad making me drive in front of my friends. And I was struggling so bad. But I love that car. I still have a stick shift. I love having a manual. We all start somewhere, and sometimes it's just finding the right way to pop that clutch to find your gear. And I love too, Dave, with podcasting, like look at us right now. We've been at the same conferences. We have so many mutual friends. We're connected on Facebook, but we never really sat down and talked like this up until that Facebook post. And this is what I love about podcasting is the networking opportunities. There's so many people that I've had as a guest on my show that have turned into friends, that have turned into power partners, that have turned into referral partners. I mean, Deidre and she and I collaborated together for the next iteration of Cap Show, and it's all due to podcasting. I think that a lot of people don't know what their goal is from having a podcast. And networking is a very good goal. It's a very reasonable, and I feel like it's a very easy goal when you're just getting started.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say when people are like, well, I interviewed this person and they didn't share my episode. I'm like, well, did you ask them any different questions? Because if you ask them the same 5 questions that they got on their last 10 episodes, their audience has already heard that. But realize, depending on how you handle this, I like to follow up with people like, hey, how's it going? I haven't talked to you in 6 months. What's going on? Everything's still cool? And they'll be like, everything's still cool. It's just that little baby relationship. And I always say podcasting, it leads to opportunities, and opportunities then lead to relationships, which lead to opportunities. And along the way, something's going to fall out. And you go, wait, what? Like, I work for Libsyn. How did I get a job at Libsyn? Because I'd been a customer for 10 years and I'd interviewed their vice president. I went to a pod camp back when there were pod camps in Pittsburgh, and I met the whole staff. And so when the wheels fell off the truck of me teaching in corporate world, I was like, where would I want to work and be in podcasting? I'm like, Libsyn. I'm like, well, I know the guy that's a vice president now. I was able to just call him up, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without, I'd had him on my show and a couple other things. It's fun when you go to a place. I remember once I went to someplace in Oklahoma, and when you're in Ohio, Oklahoma might as well be Pluto or Saturn. It's like, I've never been there. And I remember I announced, hey, I'm going to be in this place in Oklahoma. And this guy's like, dude, you are in my hometown. Can I take you to dinner? And you don't realize it's you in a spare bedroom, but there are people all over the world. And I just told people, hey, if for some reason I get killed tomorrow, it was George. I've never met this person, but I'm going to dinner with them, that whole 9 yards. Especially if you're using this as a coach or for your company, you're using this with potential future customers. And that's the part where if you can publish on a regular schedule. So that's the other thing I always say, record a couple episodes, figure out how much time does it take, and then ask yourself, can I do, let's say it took you 12 hours to do an episode. Do you have 12 hours a week to do a podcast? And if you go, no, well, guess what? You're not doing a weekly show, or you're going to farm that out to somebody. But when you can do a regular schedule, whatever that is, then you are seen as reliable. And then, like just a second ago, you shared your story about driving a stick shift. So we're getting to know you. And then when you deliver good content, they like you, and there you go, know, like, and trust. So when you say, hey, I've got this new book, I've got this new course, they're like, well, I feel comfortable with this person, and off you go.
It's so true. I love that we're talking about the process of podcasting, because that was something I didn't realize how much time I was spending with my podcast when I first started, because I was like, oh, it's a 30-minute episode, 30 minutes. But you're not thinking about the booking of the person, prepping them. I was struggling with my camera when we first started this episode, when we first hopped on here to record this episode. We talked through that, got caught up a little bit. It's an hour there, and then editing, and it does take time. But now I've brought in a team specifically for podcast editing. But I mean, because I didn't realize how much time I was spending on it. And so then I brought in one person, and then keep track of how much time you're spending, because it's an incredible medium, but you have to be consistent for it. And if you're not consistent, your audience will forget about you. I'm curious, Dave, with consistency, I always batch about 3 episodes out, with the exception of my quick casts. I always record those every week because they're like timely and trending topics. You said about 3 episodes. What do you recommend as far as seasons? Do you recommend doing every other week if you're just getting started, weekly, monthly? If someone's ready to step into holding the microphone and overcome imposter syndrome. They know what their goal is behind having the podcast. They're ready to do networking with the podcast and just have those communications. How many episodes should they be producing when they launch?
Well, that's a great question. Number one, I've seen people make mistakes by doing 20 and not getting any feedback. And then they come out and people are like, man, I really hate that lightning round thing you do. Like, oh, great. I've got 17 more episodes with a lightning round. So that's where you want to get feedback up front. It kind of depends on, I guess, in how many do you have before you launch. Kind of goes back to that feedback. How do you know when to take the pie out of the oven? Well, when it's done. So when people want to eat your pie, that's when it's time to do your podcast. Also, you have to figure out, you mentioned your why. That's so important, because if the why is I want to keep my brand in front of people so that when they finally need this service, they'll be like, oh, I know. I don't remember the name of the show. I just remember it was this quick health show brought to you by the Association of Christian Athletes. I don't remember the name of the show, but I remember the brand because they brought at the end of the show, it's like, hey, this show was brought to you by the Association of Christian Athletes. So I don't remember what it was. That, and the guy that the host's name was Jimmy Page, because every time he said that, I'm like, from Led Zeppelin? Really? But if I want to keep my brand, I might do a quick 5-minute, 2-minute tip and do it 5 days a week. If I want to show I'm the expert you want to hire, then maybe I do a weekly show for 20 minutes. It depends on what you're trying to do. And then again, record a couple and then go, how long did that take? And that's really key. I use a free tool called Toggle. It's Toggl. And that's when I learned, that my high ticket item, if you want to hire me as a consultant, like I either need to raise my price or something, because I was knocking on so many doors to get me to hire. I was like, wait, I just spent 13 hours answering a bunch of free questions, and then they finally hired me. But I was like, yeah, my high ticket item isn't really that high now that I see how long it took to get that customer. I always say you can do it easily now with your phone. Just set it for an hour, and then every hour have it go off and just go reset. And then you would find it like, wow, I spent like 2 hours watching Dukes of Hazzard and Seinfeld reruns. I sat down to eat dinner, and I'm glad I relaxed, but I spent 2 hours eating dinner, and it only took 10 minutes to microwave something. So what was I doing? You have to be careful because you don't want to cut out all the relaxation, but I don't watch live TV anymore. I record everything so I can fast forward through the commercials and things like that. But yeah, so when you're first starting out, why are you doing this? Figure out your schedule and then kind of go from there.
I love that advice. And I just have this little thing and I flip it over and it starts ticking down the time. It's been huge for me because I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and check my email. And then it's been an hour and I'm like, what the heck did I do in my email? Or do I need help with my email? Should I bring up someone from my team to go in and actually be the first line of response for clients? What's happening here? Is this the best use of my time? So tracking your time is huge. And I think especially even in a world of doom scrolling on social media, it's very important to know what your intention is before you go and open up those apps. Open them up and engage.
I think a lot of that is you have to be able to step outside of yourself. I love that little tool you just said. Often I've had the woman in the tube from Amazon would be like, set a timer for X amount of time because I'm going into YouTube. And I know that once I hit a short, it's hard. It's like a Lay's potato chip. It's hard to watch just one short. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you look up and you're like, how is it 1:30 in the morning?
Yeah.
So I've learned there's that. Just sitting on the couch is really comfortable in the living room. And there are times when I'm like, all right, be careful. Like if you grab a blanket, you're going to take a nap, whether you want one or not. So there's certain things that I do.
Have a blue blanket. It's the same thing. I'm like, oh, like whenever my husband sees the blue blanket come out and he's like, oh, Katie's done for the day. I'm like, no, I just want to be cozy. He's like, nope, I know a nap is next.
Yeah, that's it. So you learn what to, stay away from. I'm another one. I remember when, hey, I'm going to go check my email, be back in 15 minutes. My wife would be like, I'll see you in an hour.
Yeah.
So and it doesn't make you freak out, but there is a sense of stay focused when I'm like, okay, I got 25 minutes, a long time to do something.
Yeah.
And then it almost becomes a game. Like, can I get done before the timer goes off kind of thing? Yeah. That's the kind of stuff I think when I hear people say, oh, I don't have enough time. I'm like, if you got 3 kids and 3 jobs, yeah, you're right. You don't have enough time. But there are plenty of times when you do have time, you're just kind of giving your time away to things that you shouldn't.
I 100% agree. And I definitely feel that with podcasting, making the time to remain consistent is the secret to success. It's the consistency thing. There's been times where I probably would, I've had my, not as long as you, but 4 years now, I've had my podcast, which is a huge win for me because when I first launched it, I was like, man, what am I going to talk about social media wise every week? Like how many times am I going to be able to talk about Facebook? Well, we're almost 300 episodes in, and I'm like, well, apparently there's a lot I could talk about with social media. And I might have given up sooner due to vacations and kids and work if I wasn't batched ahead and had that system in place to remain consistent. So,
Yeah. You had mentioned seasons, and seasons were made or invented, shall we say, by those big shows that have like 18 people at the end. Our assistant editor of music edited, it's like, who? Because something like Serial, like they would be flying all over the world to make whatever their 12 episodes are. So they needed a break when it was over. I get that. And I always say, look, don't sacrifice your health. If you need a break, take a break, because if we burn you out, well, that's the end of the podcast as well. But I'm really leery about taking breaks for seasons, because if Jim listens to my show on the way to work and he gets in on Monday and goes, oh, I guess there's nothing from Dave today, I guess I'll just listen in silence on the way to work. I don't think that's the case. They're going to find something else. I know a report just came out from, I believe it was Edison, that we're now up to people listening to 8 episodes a week. But you become part of people's routine. And if the new show is maybe just a little bit better than yours, when you come back from your, hey, season 2 is out, you kind of have to get back on the shelf. And depending on who they replace you with, I don't know if that's imposter syndrome or what. I'm just like, I just know how this works. There's only enough time in the day. So I don't want to give anybody my spot. So I have not missed a Monday in 18 years, even when my car got hit by a deer. I'm weird. I don't batch record. My family knows on Sunday, don't mess with Dave, because Sunday is podcast day. And I lock myself in a room, and that's fine. I also know if they call, it's important because they know it's podcast day.
Well, Dave, this has been such a great conversation. And I hope that we've given people the encouragement, the green light to launch their podcast and the strategy to succeed with it and to really remain consistent with it. You are in the Podcast Hall of Fame. You've been on Rocky Mountain Marketing now. So, I mean, I think you can retire a happy man. Like, there's no other achievements for you to get now.
Nothing else to do. That's it.
I mean, this is it. So,
Gonna grab my blanket and head off to the couch.
Well, Dave, where can people check out your book, Profit from Your Podcast? Where can they connect with you? Where can they learn more about you? Tell us all the good things.
Yeah, the book you can find at profitfromyourpodcast.com. Now almost available as an audiobook. I'm doing something where it's, 4 years since the book came out, and I'm recording the audiobook now, which is kind of a mistake, but kind of not, because now I can add all the stuff that has happened since the book was out. So you can actually buy the audiobook now. And if you have questions, I'm going to use your question as some of the bonus content. So that's for the book. And then everything else you can find out at schoolofpodcasting.com.
Amazing. Well, Dave, thank you so much for responding to my Facebook post. Thanks for joining me on Rocky Mountain Marketing. This has been a pleasure.
Katie, likewise. I'm really happy to know you now. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. I hope you're leaving with valuable insights and the inspiration to lead your market. If you've enjoyed our time together and found today's podcast episode useful, I have a small favor to ask of you. Please hit that subscribe button to stay updated with the latest episodes. And if you know someone who could benefit from these episodes, maybe a fellow business leader or an aspiring entrepreneur, go ahead and share this episode with them. Let's spread the knowledge and grow together. Also, I'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation beyond the podcast. Visit me at katiebrinkley.com to connect, to find more resources, or just to share your journey. And be sure to pick up your copy of my new book, The Social Shift, at katiebrinkley.com/book. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Katie Brinkley, and I can't wait to dive into more strategies and stories with you on the next episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. Let's keep on taking your marketing to new heights.